In Idaho, one recent high school graduate openly challenged her school superintendent in protest during graduation. Here to lead our discussion is Sydney Davis Jr. Sydney, what is going on in the great, air quotes, Mormon state of Idaho?
Yes, Idaho is being shook up right now. In West Ada School District at an art school, a student is stirring up trouble by encouraging people to read literature that the school district actually once banned and has banned since December. And she wants them to read it before banning it, which I don't think sounds like a lot to ask, but that's her main point. Is she wants to at least have the adults making these decisions read that literature before deciding that it doesn't belong in the school district. So she brought a book that was recently banned. It was the graphic novel version of let's see here. Hold on, sorry, I lost my spot.
Handmaid's Tale.
A Handmaid's Tale, yes, yes, of
Yeah.
course. It was the graphic novel version of A Handmaid's Tale, and she walked up on stage and she handed it to the superintendent. The superintendent rejected it. He did not want it, so she set it on the floor. And before she handed it to him, she showed it to the audience a little bit, and then she just handed it to him. He rejected it. She laid it on the floor, and she walked off. And so now there's a debate going on where the school district says she took all the attention away from everybody else who was graduating that day, and that's the problem. And everybody else is saying, we don't think that's true. Students who were there that day say, we don't think that's true. If you watch the video, it's on TikTok, it's on YouTube. She did not say anything to the man. She did not make a statement. She did not do anything outlandish. She literally handed him a book. If you weren't close enough to see what it was, you wouldn't have even known. He rejected it. And I might argue that him rejecting it was actually more attention grabbing than her handing him the book. It's a he said, she said, they said, she said versus the video of the event, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, she did get critiqued by people saying that it was excessive.
Mm.
I think I'm on the side of the people who thought it was excessive.
Yeah.
I don't really see that this was necessary. And Eli, I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean, was she right for doing this, or did she need to do this? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I would say need is a strong word, but I think she's right too. I think that she said it herself that her walk across the stage at graduation is her moment. And that's what she chose to do with it. And I think that's appropriate. I think that I don't think that it was all that disruptive. I can see how, I think for a more effective protest, perhaps a different method might have been, more effective. But I think I would, I don't think I would agree with you. I think that, I think she was I don't see any issues with what she did, if I'm being honest.
Well, all right. So she says her goal was never to be disruptive or mess up the ceremony. But I think that that's not true. In fact, how did this even get on the internet? I mean, she didn't film it herself. She must have, had somebody film it. She showed the book, right? And I think she did, in a way, do something that didn't really need to be done. I mean, she's got 24 million views in this clickbait society. I think she knew exactly what she was doing. And in this very 15 minutes of fame society that we live in, everybody can become an overnight celebrity on the internet. I mean, that's why us three are here, isn't it? But no, seriously, I think that she took away from the validity of this ceremony. And before I get into that, I just want to see if Sydney has anything on that. I mean, is there any validity to what I just said at all?
So I think two things can be true at once.
Okay.
I think what she did can be unnecessary, and I think what she did also was not much of anything. With the exception of, for the split second, turning the book, showing the audience, it wasn't one of these. She wasn't, Vanna Whiting. She literally just showed the book, handed it to him. If anything, and obviously none of us know what we're going to do in the moment, but if anything, I still think that him shaking his head, crossing his arms, and allowing her to lay the book at his feet was much more memorable than what did she give him? I don't know. She gave him a present. Oh, look, she gave him a present. She gave him a book. That must be her favorite teacher or something. I also think I don't know what your situations were back in the day, but I remember about 3 minutes of my high school graduation. I don't
True.
remember how people walked across the stage. I don't remember what they were doing. I'm sure somebody did something, like wore a tiger tail or something like that. There's always a high school student doing something to call attention. I don't think what she did was harmful. I don't think it helps anything. I don't think it'll change anything. But I do agree that if you're going to ban literature from a school, you should read the book.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And it goes back to that whole complain all you want about who's in office, how bad a movie was, how offensive a music video was, after voting, watching the video, hearing the song, reading the book. So while in one hand, yeah, sure, we live in a clickbait society where everybody gets a 15-minute a slice of fame, we also live in a society where people can just tell kids they're not allowed to read books, which means, guess what? They're immediately going to go on Amazon and buy that book for $1 used, right? So if you don't want kids to read a book, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Barbara Streisand effect. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
So Barbara Streisand got really upset that the photos of her house were taken by paparazzi and published. Nobody gave a fuck until she got upset about it.
Yeah, sure.
Then everybody was Googling what her house looked like, right? And so everybody who's ever spent 10 seconds with teenagers know if you don't want them to do something, just don't mention it. She would never have read that book otherwise, I don't think.
Well, listen, I'm two things I want to bring up because I'm having a little bit of an oh shit moment because I do remember my high school graduation and I threw my arms up as I walked across the stage like I won the Super Bowl. And I'll never forget my dad jumping up for joy in the background. That was a huge moment for me. But you know what? That was my moment. And I did what was right for me, but I didn't take away from anybody else. Now, let me explain something. My last name starts with the letter S. My whole life, I have been watching the entire alphabet, go before me and do things. Especially, I did the same thing in high school, college graduation, and I'd say, oh, well, that person, they were the valedictorian. Oh, that person was on the lacrosse team. Oh, I knew that guy. We were in history class together, et cetera, whatever. And then this person gets up, and then for the rest of the time, people are going, can you see that? Yeah, I mean, Sydney, you just alluded to it. Like, people are like, oh, what'd she hand him? What, it was, and it became a deal. What was graduation like for the one person that went up and got their diploma after she did that? Eli, reflections on that.
That is a good point. And after you kind of started to explain it, I see your point of view on it. The person, it would be difficult to follow that. I, like Sydney, only remember I have like a 3-second memory from my graduation that I can think of right now. And it was like sitting in the chairs waiting like for somebody to finish speaking so I could go get my diploma. It wasn't even the walk itself. But the person that just graduated, that's not the case. That person who just graduated thinks that that's going to be a significant moment for the rest of their life and really, really feels that right now. So I think that you have a very valid point for that immediately next person, or maybe even the second, maybe the third after it. That little event, people were talking about that rather than listening to or watching those people graduate. At the same time, I think I also agree with Sydney that it was the superintendent's display of like rejecting it. If he had just taken it, he had a suit on. He could take it, put it in one of his pockets, and move on.
Yeah,
and that would have, I think, been a lot less significant of a moment, and probably we probably wouldn't be talking about it.
Go ahead, Sydney. You wanted to respond.
I was going to say, do you mind if I respond? So I would argue it wasn't a thing until the video went around later after graduation was over. I would actually be curious how many people even could see what happened because it looked like a large auditorium. And even when you turn the book, I've watched the video, which is it looks like it was filmed by somebody on like the very front row, or maybe there was a cameraman filming the whole thing. I don't think anybody would have even known what happened if the video hadn't gone around, especially if he had just taken the book. It would have looked like she just gave him a gift at graduation.
Sure.
But him going, probably made a lot of people go, what just happened? I don't know. I'll ask later or something,
Yeah.
But I might argue that the video that came out later would be a distraction. But by then, they've already walked. Students have already walked. And
Mhm.
if you think about it, maybe everybody did notice. Let's say in that moment, everybody noticed. And I listened in the video to see if anybody booed or anything. There was really a non-reaction. That person might actually look great for not doing some shit. They get up and they're like, I'm just going to graduate normally. And all the people who are mad at her are like, thank you for being mature. You know?
Yeah, I definitely agree there. The superintendent didn't help his case. In fact, I think he played right into her trap,
Exactly.
if that's what you want to call it.
Yes.
So in the long term, she probably, or actually let's call it short term, but she probably achieved, right? The bigger message here. She probably achieved what she was looking for, because now everybody's looking at this school and they're saying, well, why the heck are they banning these books in the first place? And now that superintendent, that district, they have to answer for these actions. They have to justify why they're banning books that are anti-LGBTQ or talk about sex. Actually, Sydney, didn't you have a list of books that you were able to recite that were banned
Yes.
in this school district?
Yes, I actually found a link that some local news station had done a list of all the books they were banning as of December, which is when this book was banned. And that list includes Wicked, like the musical that's coming out, a book about the life and times of the Wicked Witch in the West, completely fictitious, right? Then A Stolen Life by J.C. Dugard, one of the most famous kidnapping victims in the American history. Her autobiography is banned in that district, which I think is a mistake. But they also banned Water for Elephants, Kingdom of Ash, and they lumped all of these books into they're all sexually explicit, which I think is horrific to say to JC Dugard. It's like, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
sorry, what happened to you is too explicit for people to learn about it in high school. But they also made a statement, which I thought was also quite like weak in terms of defending their decision. And I'll just read it really quick. So they said, according to a representative of West Ada School District, these books were banned due to what district personnel characterized as strong explicit content. Titles like The Handmaid's Tale and Wicked were two of the most recent additions on the no-go list. West Ada School District released a statement on the newest list saying, this decision is aimed at fostering an environment that encourages diverse perspectives, which I think it does not. I think it quite does the opposite, while ensuring the protection of our students. Our commitment is to provide a spectrum of choices that promote critical thinking and respectful discourse, fostering a space where learning thrives and minds are challenged and safeguarded. That, to me, is the statement of the school defending why they left those books in.
Well, Eli, what is wrong with banning all of these books? Is there justification, one that we could understand?
Well, you and I think, recently talked about book banning on the nonprofits, and book banning or book censorship. And when I think is like, after high school, a lot of people may not step into a library again, and sometimes it's depending on where they go on, but like that is true for a lot of people. So that's the last place we're going to get that information. We're going to have access to those books in those libraries. And what's happening is this information is being restricted. What I said last time is that you need true information to make good choices about the world. And you can't know what is true information, what is good information, until you learn how to separate the two. And if you're letting if these schools are like, well, we're going to take these out, so like we don't worry about it, we'll let you know what you need to know and what you need to learn about, and just don't worry about the rest. And then you get out into the world, and now you have to figure out how the rest of the world works because all of this other stuff was kept from you. And that's the position that a lot of like adults that I know are in. Like, and even at my age, I'm 32. For me, all the way down to like people that are just getting out of high school and college in their early 20s. They're just trying to figure out how like all these things about the world work that they were just never exposed to, because PEN America found that there are 4,240 unique titles that have been challenged in the United States, like in different libraries, public libraries and school libraries in the United States. The most challenged books, not surprisingly, having to do with like sexual well-being and LGBTQIA+ issues. What they're doing is they are cultivating the information that they want people to know because they're afraid of what happens if they know the rest. And that's what I think is the most sinister thing about it.
Yeah, and I can see your point there. Sydney, you had an interesting point I want to get back to because I think it's related. You said that the justification that they gave was actually a reason they left them in. Can you go ahead and just expand on that point?
Yeah, the verbiage that they use in their justification for why they ban these books. The first thing I noticed when I read it is this is what I would say if I was a librarian defending these books. They say our commitment is to provide a spectrum of choices that promote critical thinking and respectful discourse, fostering a space where learning thrives and minds are challenged and safeguarded. One, my body, my choice includes my brain. So I should not be dictated by any government-sponsored entity or educational entity what I can and cannot read. I think that's ridiculous.
Sure.
If I read something and I have nightmares about it, sounds like a me problem, right? If I read something like I love the show 16 and Pregnant or whatever, like the teen shows. None of them, not a single story has started with I was a virgin until I read Wicked, or I was a virgin until I read, somebody might say that vampire movie that came out a few years ago, Twilight. Nobody's story starts like that. I've never heard it. I've wasted hours of my time watching these types of shows. And so I think, one, we have a problem where schools are dictating what kids can read. I think that statement alone is the complete opposite of what they're actually doing. And it's dangerous because they're releasing a statement that says we're fostering this environment where choices are available. And then they're doing the opposite. So I guess from now on, we can just say whatever we want to say we're doing and then do the opposite when people don't make us prove it. And also, I would like to point out a couple of statistics that I found that I thought were interesting. So these books were banned in December of 2023. In December 2023, or by December 2023, the most popular television shows watched by teenagers on their own time, outside of school, were Sex Education, which I don't even need to tell you what that one's about, Everything Now, which is a show about an eating disorder, and Riverdale, which is vampires and wolves like having sex with each other and like breaking up because they're all in high school. So obviously they're going to be exposed to this content either willingly, or they're just going to be in the room when it's playing, or they're going to find it on Netflix. So whose job is it to determine what safeguarded means? And if all they're doing is banning sexual content, I think there's a lot of harm there. One, it's just not diverse choices. You can't tell me I have choices and then it's kind of like we were joking about earlier. You can't tell me I get to vote and then only give me like what you like to vote from and then call it choices. And then two, I would argue that that's part of the reason why we have such a lack of sexual education in this country, why we're missing, because we're not allowed to read books where we can then go home and be like, Mom, what are they talking about? What is this? What does this mean? What are they doing? And like I said earlier, if you make a big deal to a teenager, they're going to live, breathe, and die by that being their brand from now on.
Yeah. I think that, Eli, when you said, we've talked about this before, right? Because you and I have done a few shows together, and you mentioned the article we talked about, and what was happening was books were being banned, and there was a bill that was being passed saying, well, the books that are going to stay should have a qualified individual that are allowed to decide what can stay and what could go, right? And what I'm seeing here is a lack of a qualified individual, or a lack of a coherent justification for why books are being banned. So Sydney gave an explanation and talked about how hypocritical it was. And Eli, I think you were saying essentially the same thing. Like, this is a lack of diversity and it targets LGBTQ. Eli, what trend are we seeing when it comes to book banning? Right? Where are we seeing them banned, and what is the commonality?
So, as I did mention a little bit ago, the most commonly challenged books have to do with sexual well-being and LGBTQIA plus issues. So I actually found a list of the 10 most challenged books in 2023. The first one is called Genderqueer. There's one called All Boys Aren't Blue. It was challenged for LGBTQIA content, claimed to be sexually explicit. There's one called This Book is Gay, which I think is an amazing title. Sex education claimed to be sexually explicit. Perks of Being a Wallfire, Flamer, The Bluest Eye, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. So what in each of these, when it talks about like in every single one of them, here's one that's not. But as I'm going down this list, there are 2 on this list that do not include the words or challenged for LGBTQIA plus content. Only 2 out of the 10 most challenged books. So, I mean, is 10 a representative of the entire sample of 4,349 in the second half of 2023? No, it's an insignificant sample, but I think it speaks to it a little bit.
And
Go ahead,
wasn't
Sydney.
well, and I was going to say, it's interesting also when you point out that list, wasn't The Bluest Eye, I could be wrong, but it's the same book I'm thinking of, wasn't it written by an African-American woman? Isn't it like a book about POC by POC? And I think it's interesting.
It doesn't have any information about it here. It's written by Toni Morrison.
Yeah. Yep. There it is. Yep. And so I think that's interesting that one of the few that aren't banned for being LGBTQIA plus or LGBT supporting is written by a Black woman.
Yeah, well, we have seen in Florida, for example, the banning of certain African-American history books. We've seen different culture history books banned in that state. But to the broader commonality, we're seeing books banned in highly religious, highly Christian states, highly Christian districts. The ironic thing, and the thing that is inconsistent, and what these decision makers should be held accountable for, is the fact that the Bible is not banned. If you want to talk about sexual atrocity, we should look to the Bible. But then again, how many Christians actually read it? So it's not a surprise to me that they have no idea what's in it.
But they love banning books they don't read, so it should fit the model.
That's true. That's true.
It does fit the model.
This is a trend that we are seeing, and if you want to hear more about book banning and how it is not okay, go ahead and click the link below.